Hi, this is the Voice of Heidie Calero with another economic capsule regarding the public debt of Puerto Rico. This time we are going to look at the COFINA deal renegotiated by the Puerto Rico Oversight and Fiscal Board. Well, recently, Espacios Abiertos questioned whether this COFINA agreement was as good as the Promesa board said it was. Let's look at some of the history of why COFINA started, and it was snowballing into this huge debt, which ended up in a default or lack of payment by the Puerto Rico government. Back in 1970s, this practice of an extra constitutional debt started small, as everything starts in life, right? Small, but it continued to grow. And it was addressing some of the debt that Puerto Rico had, maybe for the Sugar Corporation, which is already extinct, or the Shipping Authority, which also does no longer exist. Well, certain of those debts were not included within the constitutional limit of our public debt, and it was called extra constitutional debt. Well, between 2000 and 2012, this extra constitutional debt snowballed into $19 billion. How did we come about this? Let's look at the graph of the revenues and expenses of the general fund. And notice here in 2008, the Great Recession, Puerto Rico's revenues is the blue line, and then the orange line are the expenses. Notice how they escalated 2009 and then 2010, and more or less moved in tandem with the revenues, but really more expenses than revenues. Yet the COFINA, which was the public corporation established so that it would deal with the extra constitutional debt, skyrocketed from 2008 through 2012. That's when I told you that it was almost $19 billion. Well, it started small, as I said before, and then in this next graph, it shows how COFINA, which was adopted back in 2006 under Law 91, I think it was, started with a bond issue in 2007 for senior debt of $4.5 billion. It continued in 2008 with $737 million, and in 2009 it issued $238 million, but now it also issued $5.3 billion in subordinate bonds. And then in 2010, more of those subordinate bonds, $3.6 billion, and in 2011, both senior debt, $1.1 billion, and almost $800 million in subordinate debt. That debt was repaid with pledge sales and use tax. Almost 50% of those sales and use tax revenues would go to service this debt first, and whatever was left would go to the general fund. Well, we renegotiated this public debt, and these are the major aspects of that agreement with the Oversight Board, and finally approved by Title III by the judge of the federal court. Well, 7%, the haircut was of the 100 cents that are paid on principal, only 93 cents would be paid for senior bonds, but the junior bonds would only get 56 cents on the dollar, not the 93 cents that would get the senior bonds. We had current interest bonds. Somehow the $11.5 billion were converted into what was called the 9.6 bond issues with capital appreciation bonds with an average coupon of 4.56. Those are current interest bonds, sorry. And the capital appreciation bonds, which were currently $6.1 billion, and those are the ones that interest is paid on interest, so it skyrockets the debt service. They would be converted into $2.4 billion in those accrued appreciation values of bonds payable by 2044, and paying $14.2 billion. I mean, great deal for the bondholders, not so great for Puerto Rico. And on top of that, we have that the Fiscal Board indicated that by 2023, Puerto Rico's economy would still be or would again, after very minor positive growth of 0.1, 0.2%, it would grow. It would be again in negative economic growth. So I think that it is important to look at the forecast of the economy of Puerto Rico when evaluating the proposed debt renegotiation deal of the GOs, because those forecasts are going to say whether Puerto Rico can pay or again it will go into default as soon as 2023. The board insists that $69 billion from Hurricane Maria are going to come to Puerto Rico through FEMA and CDBG disaster loans. Well, only $40 billion have been assigned by Congress, and President Trump has said that it's going to be trickle, drip, drip, drip until those funds come. So I don't think that the forecast of the Puerto Rico economy justify the economic growth that the board is saying. And if that is not true, then we have a problem in terms of the general fund revenues, the fiscal revenues that will repay that debt, not only COFINA, but also the debt of the GOs and other renegotiated debt. So important to look at the forecast. More on this topic in our next capsule.